Landlords in Ohio may soon no longer have to pay the unpaid utility bills of their tenants. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over what the state legislature in Ohio recently passed. They passed a bill that says that landlords will no longer have to pay the unpaid utility bills from their tenants. Now, Ohio is one of those places where if a tenant has utilities that they didn't pay, well, the utility companies, the municipalities, whoever's in charge of those bills, they try to dump that bill on the landlord, and if the landlord doesn't pay, then they can put a lien on the property. They could take the property away from the rightful owner, all for a debt that they personally did not accumulate. It's all for the tenant's debt. So, I'm all for this sort of legislation, but those municipalities, those cities, they are pissed off because they know that they're going to lose a lot of money on this. They're going to have to suddenly go and chase these tenants down to get the money that they're owed, and they know the tenants won't be able to pay like the landlords were. Okay, so they're going to lose a lot of money. But when it comes to fairness, there's only one fair way to do this, and forcing a landlord to pay a debt that isn't theirs is wrong. Okay? And I've been saying this for years. I've been covering these cities and municipalities that have these ridiculous laws for a long time. And, every time I read about it, it just makes my stomach feel sick because they're screwing over landlords and forcing them to pay bills that a debt that someone else accumulated. That's just not the way the thing should be done. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. What do you think of these municipalities that have these laws in place that require landlords to be responsible for the debt, the utility debt that these tenants accumulate? Okay? What do you think of Ohio trying to basically throw this sort of law out? I think it's a good thing. I think it's time that landlords don't end up stuck with these bills. I know here in Nebraska, landlords are not responsible for the bills that the tenants accumulate, okay? Those bills, they follow the tenants wherever they go, and eventually they're going to have to pay. And it's wrong to say, hey, we're going to allow this tenant to, get thousands of dollars into debt and then force a landlord to pay that bill. That's just wrong, okay? So let's get into this article. It's coming from thecentersquare.com, and it says, Ohio landlords may not be responsible for tenants' unpaid utility bills. Whew, yeah, good news. But let's get into the article and see what it says. Ohio landlords moved a step closer to staying off the hook for tenants' large unpaid utility bills after the House passed a bill Wednesday over objections from municipalities and utility organizations. The bipartisan bill, House Bill 422, came as a way to change a long-time process in the state that holds people who have not contracted for service liable for unpaid debts. The circumstances have been well defined in the legislation to ensure individuals who have contracted for service are held responsible for any unpaid debts. And this legislation will develop a process through the EPA to ensure an avenue for redress for undue fees, said co-sponsor Representative Mark Frazier, Republican from Newark. And it's pretty odd when a bill passes with bipartisan support, but it looks like this one did. Excuse me. And for good reason. I mean, honestly, forcing someone, to be responsible for someone else's debts, it's wrong. Okay, it's wrong. Imagine, and this is a great example I like to use. Imagine that someone else, goes out, they charge up a credit card, right? And, they owe thousands of dollars, and then they just say, well, I can't afford to pay this, but Bob over here, he can afford it. And so he just throws the credit card bill over at Bob, and then Bob, the credit card company goes after Bob and says, hey, well, you have to pay this because, that guy over there, he couldn't pay it, so therefore you're responsible for it. Well, the credit card companies wouldn't be allowed to do that, and the utility company shouldn't be allowed to do this. And so it's about time that they finally change the law in the state of Ohio to prevent this from happening, okay? Ohio law puts the responsibility for debts accrued on property owners rather than tenants who contracted for the services by default. Municipalities can place a property tax lien on those properties. The legislation would make any person who contracts to receive municipal utility service financially responsible for the service. It also would establish an appeal process through the EPA for landlords. Yeah, the person who contracted for the service is responsible. That's why, a lot of the times when I was talking to landlords who had properties in Ohio, they were saying that they never allowed the tenant to put the utilities in their name just in case the tenant decided not to pay their utility bill, because then they would suddenly get a surprise saying, hey, you owe us, XX thousands of dollars, and they didn't want to have to go through that in the first place. So instead, they kept the utilities in their name, and then they either charged the tenant for the utilities through the regular rent payment, or they just made the rent much higher and then included that utility fee as part of the regular rent. So yeah, they still were getting paid, but they made sure that they didn't end up with surprise bills or a surprise lien on their property from these municipalities. I mean, this was basically just so wrong in so many different ways. Imagine you're a landlord, right? And you have a tenant in your property. This tenant doesn't pay their electric bill for, months. Meanwhile, it's been summer. They had the air conditioning running the whole time. The utility company doesn't notify you. Why would they notify you? Your name isn't on the contract. They're sending the notices to the tenant. The tenant doesn't notify you, and then the tenant just decides to skip out and not pay the bill. Well, one day you look up and you realize, hey, my property has a lien on it. And if you don't get that lien off your property, you could lose it. Okay, and that is a horrible position to be put in. And it was just straight wrong, considering you never entered a contract for service with that utility company. The tenant did. You never, refused to pay your debt. No, the tenant did that. And now the utility companies are going to have to go after the tenant, after the person who actually owes them money, instead of trying to be a leech and steal money from landlords. Essentially, my joint sponsor and I are trying to ensure that property owners are not stuck with excessive sewer and water bills racked up by a tenant who is delinquent in paying those bills, testified Representative Thomas West, Democrat from Canton. The city of Columbus argued the bill would limit utilities in recovering costs and negatively impact other consumers and interfere with municipal home rule authority. So, yeah, the utility company and the municipalities are like, no, now we won't be able to collect our money. It's like, so you won't be able to steal your money from somebody who never owed you? So that's you think that's fair, that you're able to steal money from somebody who you never had a contract with and who didn't actually owe the money? But that way we can keep costs lower for everyone else? No, screw you. You're a thief. You are literally stealing money from landlords. If you think that this is cool, then you have a hole in your head, because it makes no sense. Okay? You are literally stealing. Columbus Department of Public Utilities ultimately holds property owners responsible for tenant bills, and now they're going to go into their logic. Because property owners have the closest relationship to the tenant, and as a result, they are often in the best position to ensure that unpaid balances are paid, testified Ann Aubrey, interim director of Columbus DPU. Landlords are in a better position to track past due utility bills, communicate with tenants to arrange for payment, and hold tenant rent deposits until past due utility bills are paid. That's complete garbage, okay? So most of the time when these tenants aren't paying their utilities, hey, guess what? A lot of the times they're not paying rent either. Okay? So now you want us to act as your debt collector? That's what you're saying right here. You're saying that you want landlords to act as your debt collector. No, you hire a debt collector. You pay them to track down the debts that you're owed. That's not our job. Our job, we're the landlord. We rent the property. We're not responsible to pay your bills for you. You're not able to put a lien on our property anymore. And guess what? They did a good job up in Ohio, this legislator passing this bill and these laws saying that, hey, these utility companies are in the wrong. They can no longer do this. So, hey, good news for landlords up there in Ohio. Good news. And I hope that, this garbage gets thrown out all over the country wherever it's implemented.